Great. Hi, everybody. I am Sue Ann Caulfield. I'm the Associate Director of the Donia Center for Human Rights. It's actually Donia Human Rights Center, DHRC. I get it right only when I remember the acronym. Our director is right here, Steve Ratner. And we are delighted to present today's panel, which is titled Human Rights and LGBTQ Love, Art and Fiction as Resistance. And this panel is sponsored by the Donia Center as well as a couple of collaborators, the African Studies Center, the Department of Afroamerican and African Studies, the Department of Women and Gender Studies, as well as the Spectrum Center for LGBTQ plus issues here at the University of Michigan. And our speakers today are going to address how art and fiction can be tools to celebrate love and resist hostility, the kind of hostility particularly that's faced by members of LGBTQ plus communities across Africa. And we're going to open with a screening of a short film, which is titled Zururu Zururu, The Smile Blooms. And this film was created, co-created by the Belgian Cameroonian director and activist Martha Julo Kamga, who is unable to be here, but also it was produced by our very own University of Michigan professor Frieda Ekotto, who's right here and will also participate in the panel. And the film is, you'll see it in a second, it offers a poetic immersion into what our central theme is, that is queer love as resistance. And Zururu, I had to look it up, it means wandering or wandering, wanderer. And the film follows Cameroonian wanderers who, despite a legal and social environment that criminalizes their existence, are able to find home and joy in one another. And by doing so, they dismantle the myth that queer love is un-African. So I won't say any, I have a lot more that I could say, but I won't. I'll let you see it and see what you think. I think you'll enjoy it. It's 19 minutes long, and so immediately following the film, I will invite our panelists to come to the stage, and I'll introduce the chair of our session, Hala Al-Karib, and she will introduce the other panelists. So with that, please join me in welcoming our panelists, and we'll show the film. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So I think this film is titled so perfectly because the part, The Smile Blossoms, at the end, I've seen this now, this is the third time I've watched this film. It's like I'm just smiling, and it's not funny, it's just fun. That's my reaction. So I really look forward to hearing Frieda. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about it. So thank you for sharing the film with us. I also want to thank Wes Wright, who's in the back, always behind the scenes, but also in front. He helped us think about this, conceive, create this event. He's been the key contact person with all of our presenters, and absolutely nothing gets done at the Donia Center without Wes. So thank you, Wes, so much. And the chair, I just want to thank the chair of our panel today is Hala Al-Karib. She is the inaugural Raoul Wallenberg Human Rights Practitioner in Residence here at the Donia Center. We created this residency in order to bring to the university community someone who's been working to defend human rights on the ground, someone who could come, step back for a semester from their own work, take a breather, and engage in their own academic reflection and interact with our students and faculty. And Hala has done that in multiple ways and well beyond our expectations. So we were thrilled when she accepted our invitation, and we've been so pleased to have her here in our environment. So she's been here this winter. It's a semester-long residency, and we'll have another residency. A call for applications goes out in the fall, and we'll have another residency the year after that. Hala Al-Karib is a native of Sudan, where she is the regional director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. It goes by the acronym SIHA. This is an organization that combines the interests of about 100 organizations working in 9 different African countries, all to reduce gender oppression in a variety of ways. She was, in 2029, a leading voice in Sudan's revolution that year. She worked closely with grassroots women's groups, activists, and youth networks to demand democratic reforms and gender justice. And since then, very tragically, she's been dedicated, I mean, not her dedication isn't tragedy, the situation in Sudan since then has been very tragic, and she's been a leading voice calling out for an end to the violence, particularly, specifically the violence against women and girls that is part of the armed conflict there, the civil wars that have happened over the past several years. Her expertise is frequently sought at the highest levels of international diplomacy, including the United Nations Security Council, where she's briefed the council several times, including most recently last month, where she implored them to pay attention and to do something to end the violence, which unfortunately has been unyielding since the Civil War began. Hala Al-Karib's work has also been recognized by various international awards, including the Civil Society Leadership Award from the Global Affairs Canada in 2023. She was also named one of CNN's top 30 gender equality defenders and BBC's 100 most inspiring and influential women in 2024. So her work on challenging gender violence and entrenched legal discrimination in various African nations makes her uniquely suited to lead today's dialogue. So please join me in welcoming her, and she will introduce our other panelists. So thank you. And if the others could please take the stage. Caroline. And if you could please use the microphones, because we're recording.
Do you want to sit in the middle? So I sit in the middle? Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. So thank you very much, Swan, for the very generous introduction. I mean, I am, breathless of this film, and I'm quite honored to be among such distinguished and amazing speakers. Today I've been looking forward for this panel, throughout the past few months. I mean, the film, Dr. Ekotto, is amazing. And the minute I saw it, I felt that this is a project and a work that should have been seen by women across the continent. It's extremely important and critical, navigating our multiple identities, our ancient Black identities as Nubians, as Africans, that came out of a number of places. And, and seeing each other and loving each other and celebrating that connections with each other, that unbroken bond, that acknowledgement of each other's. It is a struggle. It is absolutely a struggle, and very painful struggle against, constant negligence, and, the film is simply saying we are here, and we are powerful, and we are beautiful, and we are more than capable, and we will not hide or vanish or disappear. And this power of love, that passion, for everything, the places, the rivers, the people, the details, and then the acknowledgement of the self-love, it's extremely powerful. And, our bodies, our Blackness, our hair, everything. So that's, I can't, stop talking about the film. And this is resistance. This is what resistance means, is actually, to have that capacity to acknowledge ourselves and acknowledge, and see our power. So my first speaker, of course, I'm quite honored, is Dr. Frieda Ekotto. She is a recipient of the Nicholas Golden Prize for Philosophical Literature in 2014. And in 2015, she was awarded the Brandsit Award for Excellence in her field. In 2016, she received the John H.D. Faculty Award for Distinguished Graduate Mentoring in Humanities from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. In 2018, she was awarded an honorary degree at Colorado College. She has produced 2 documentaries, Vibrancy Silence, a discussion with my sister in 2017, and I have seen it. It's an amazing short film, in addition to Zorora, Zorora, the film that we have just seen. She is the resident of the Modern Languages Associations, the president of the Modern Languages Association between 2023-2024, and served as the chair of the Department of Afroamericans and African Studies from 2014 to 2018, among other leadership roles. Frieda Ekotto is a novelist and a literary critic. She is best known for her novels which focus on gender, sexuality in sub-Saharan Africa, and her work on the writer Jean Genet, particularly her political analysis of his prison's writing and his impact as a race theorist in the Francophone world. Her research and teaching focuses on literature, film, race, and law in the Francophone world, spanning France, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Maghreb. She is a film producer and a filmmaker. Dr. Ekotto, you are an academic, an intellectual, and an artist. Can you talk to us about your creative art as an African woman plays a role with multiple identities in resisting and challenging this silence that has been forced on us as women from sub-Saharan Africa, and how your arts inform your academia and vice versa?
Thank you so much for this introduction. I'm very honored to be here today. So I came to Michigan not knowing that I would be teaching films, but because no one was really teaching African cinema at the time when I started, so I decided to start teaching African cinema. But then I noticed that some of these images coming from NGOs and what have you, particularly on LGBTQ, they were always showing violence. Like that in the continent, we don't love each other. And I was struck by that. So I quickly decided to go beyond the camera and produce something else. So I've made 4 films since. The last one was shown a couple months ago here at the African Film Festival. But I think for me, creativity has given me a way to be a queer person within the continent of Africa. You talked about resistance. That's how I resist. I write stories about women loving each other. I try to produce images of women loving each other and showing that within the continent, we love each other very much. It's not that we don't love each other, we're violent and all of that. It's the way they want to represent us. So I'm quickly trying to give another representation of women within the continent. So.
Thank you very much. So you are resisting violence through your film and your art, and you are countering the violent images about the continent. So how is that informs your academic work, your research, and other work?
Well, they work together. So I wrote I'm a specialist of Jean Genet. Jean Genet was a famous 20th century French writer. He's after Proust. And Jean Genet wrote a lot about queerness. And Actually, when I started, I was trying to write my dissertation. It was not coming. I was reading Jean Genet, so I said, okay, what about just writing a story of two women confined somewhere in the continent? Because Genet talks about confinement. He wrote all his writing in prison. So that's how I started writing my stories. And I have not stopped since. So, you know, when I have, in my teaching, in my research, you know, all my work is informed by each other, like, you know, everything I do. So I mostly work on actually African women, you know, questions of desires and political issues and, you know, other issues.
Thank you. So we are going to move to our next speaker, Jude Dibia. He is a Nigerian novelist, short story writer, and editor, whose work is known for its fearless engagement with sexuality, identity, class, and power of contemporary African society. He's the author of Walking with Shadows, Unbridled, and Blackbird, and the co-editor of Love Offers No Safety, Nigeria's Queer Men Speak. His writing has been widely recognized for opening space for marginalized voices within African literature. Jude is a recipient of a number of literature prizes in Sweden, Europe, and Nigeria. He is also contributed fictions and essays to numerous international anthologies. Now based in Sweden, he works across writing, editing, and cultural advocacy, bridging African and global literary conversations while mentoring emerging writers and supporting freedom of expressions initiative. Jude, it's really an honor to have you here today. And my question to you, you know, I don't know, when I was reading about you, I just thought about Steve Biko and the struggle for, you know, for our consciousness. He taught us that writing is a central form of resistance, and his work focuses on mental liberation, asserting that psychological independence was the first step towards freedom. You are from Nigeria, where you lived for a very long time, most of your life. You fought against all kinds of repressions that targeted you personally and others on the front line. How does your writing help free Nigerians and African queers who share the same struggle?
All right, thank you so much, Hala. I wish I was physically there with all of you, but unfortunately, I'm stuck here in Sweden, but I'm just glad to be joining you. And also to Frieda, I thought the movie was absolutely wonderful. I loved it so much. I loved the fact that it was, it didn't ask to be there or to exist. It just existed. So that was wonderful. Okay, to your question, Hala. It's funny you mentioned Steve Biko, because his idea of mental liberation has always resonated with me because it speaks to something deeper than political change. Laws can shift, regimes can fall, but if people still carry fear, shame, or internalized rejection within themselves, then the work of liberation remains unfinished. For many LGBTQ people in Nigeria, the internal struggle begins long before the law ever appears. It begins in the language we hear as children, in the silence around certain topics, in the stories we are told about what is acceptable and what is not. When you grow up in a society where your existence is repeatedly described as impossible, immoral, or foreign, the first prison you must confront is often the one created in your mind. This is where writing becomes quite powerful. When I wrote Walking with Shadows, I was not thinking primarily about activism in the conventional sense. I was thinking about recognition. I wanted to create a story in which a Nigerian man struggling with his sexuality could exist fully on the page, complex, conflicted, human. And at the time, many readers in Nigeria had never encountered such a character in a Nigerian novel. The mere act of placing that life at the center of a narrative challenged the idea that queer Africans were somehow invented somewhere. We're talking about literature here. Um, Literature can do something that politics alone often cannot. It allows people to see themselves reflected in ways that restore dignity. For someone who has spent years believing that they're alone, that that moment of recognition itself can be transformative. It can loosen the grip of shame. It can open small windows through which a different future becomes imaginable. But writing also speaks beyond those who share the experience. It invites different readers who may never have considered their lives before to encounter this abstract debates about human stories and human rights. Fiction slows people down. It forces empathy. It asks the readers to sit with another person's interior life for a while. And in that sense, I would say writing contributes to the mental liberation on two levels. For those living with repression, it can affirm that their lives are not errors or anomalies. And for the broader society, it challenges the narrative that justify exclusion in the first place. And of course, literature alone cannot dismantle unjust laws, but it can shift the emotional, imaginative terrain in which those laws exist. It makes it harder to deny someone's humanity once you have lived inside the story. And for me, this is where writing becomes a form of resistance. It's not always loud, it's not always confrontational, but persistent. So each story that we create creates a small breach in the walls of silence. And sometimes those breaches are where real changes begins. So this is how I feel my writing or my literature actually helps and actually creates a sort of platform that actually helps the Nigerians or other African readers as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jude. That's fantastic. I have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
If you can talk about exile and how is that impacting your sense of resistance, and connection to what's happening in Nigeria?
Well, I think being in exile actually it gives you a sort of distance that allows you to see things in the more broader sense. When I left Nigeria like 12 years ago, I didn't exactly live the struggle. I didn't leave behind my voice. I didn't leave anything that was emotionally important to me. What exile did for me was to create a safe space where I could actually still operate and do the things that I felt were important. So exile hasn't changed me in a way that people would think. I still carry on with the kind of advocacy work that I've been doing.
Thank you so much. Now I'm moving to my friend, Caroline Kouassiaman, the executive director, and we share the same struggle, at the front line, can relate absolutely and appreciate and acknowledge. She is the executive director of ISDAO, the initiative of Sankofa, Afrique request, yeah. And Caroline is an activist, that has been leading this struggle, and supporting the West African movement for gender equality and gender diversity for some time. Even before she joined ISDAW as the executive director in 2019. She is a queer, bilingual, African feminist, Ivorian, and African American heritage, and currently she calls Côte d'Ivoire her home. Caroline has over 20 years of diverse professional experience in philanthropy, human rights activism, and education. And she has been in the field of feminism, human rights, and philanthropy since 2011, both as a staff and a member in leading philanthropic institution and as a strategic advisor in other innovative grant-making initiatives, including Voice Program, the Active Fund, and the Newman Fund. She holds a Bachelor in Economics and Diplomacy and World Affairs from Occident College in the United States, and a Master in Public Administration degree, and a Master in International Relations from the Maxwell School University in the United States. She sees herself as a builder, connector, and very curious, and a knowledge seeker. So Caroline, as a frontline worker, and I'm really aware of that, you face numerous challenges and threats. You are working directly with those who are affected, by layers and layers of neglections and violence. So while you are attempting to fulfill your obligation and to support the most vulnerable, particularly poor women and marginalized women who are at high risk of attacks and often remain invisible and completely silenced without access to any assistance or for their voices to be heard. Can you provide us with some ideas on your strategies of navigating these realities, if possible? And if you can share with us how art contributes to, to the work you are doing.
Just those really simple questions. Thank you so much, Hala, and thank you to the Center for having this space and inviting me to be here. Thank you so much, Professor, for the film, and I think it was really important to have, as we talk about these things, it's not an abstract, being able to have a visual that we engage with and a visual that talks about joy and connection, I think was so critical. And I was thinking, actually, I had a fun moment in the last part of the film where we're talking about hair. And about 2 years ago, we organized a convening bringing together queer women from across 9 countries of West Africa. And one of the exercises we had was a body mapping and a discussion around, what does it look like? What does it look like? What does it taste like? What does our movement look like? What does it taste like? What do we hear? What do we, and actually, one of the things that came up again and again across the 9 countries when people said, our movement is also about our hair. So it's, having locks, having colors, how we adorn our body is how we express ourselves, but also how we connect and find ourselves as community. So that it just resonated with me because I remember every single one of the 9 countries, people said hair. Hair is how we connect with each other. So I will have a lot to say, but I'll try to keep it brief. I work for ISDAW, which stands for Initiative Sankofa d'Afrique de l'Ouest. We are a West African LGBTQI activist-led fund, has a lot of different words, but the main idea is that we build power and resistance and resilience of our community through resources. So, and resources, when I'm talking here, I'm talking about money, first and foremost, but not just money. We are activist-led, so it means that it's activists from our communities who make decisions about our grants. When we talk about, your question really, you talked about power and people who don't have power. The very way in which we make grants is actually building power, where communities can define what are their priorities, what are the needs, and can actually get money to help them do that. That is also building community power. So we are primarily a grant maker. We also do some convenings. We're a storyteller, and we work across 9 countries in West Africa. I'm gonna go through this very quickly, but it's important to name them. Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Liberia, Mali, Nigeria, Senegal, and Togo. It always helps me to do this in alphabetical order, otherwise I forget a country. And we are going into our 8th year of grant making. So we have been able, in a context that is incredibly difficult, in a context where we're facing criminalization, increasing criminalization across the region, stigma and discrimination, rejection, so many different things, we have been able to get funding to organizations and individuals, over 150 organizations and individuals in the last 8 years. So we are building that power in the ways in which we're resourcing our community. One of the things that's been really important from us from the beginning, of course, is deeply listening and learning. As I mentioned, we are participatory grant makers so that decisions are made by the activists in our communities. And when we talk about how do people navigate a context that's very difficult, one of the things that we've really been pushing is we can't think about safety and security emergency separate from the work. We are in crisis. We have always been in crisis. And so we have to build that into how we fund as a funder. So we, for example, we include additional funding for every single grant that is awarded that's just for safety, security, and emergency response. And what it does is it lets communities decide how they need to, how they define safety, security, and emergency, but also how they respond. So what that means is if there is a difficult situation where maybe there is somebody who's been thrown out of their house or is facing physical danger, there's actually money in country to move that person today. And that's very different from the status quo where you have to apply for emergency funding and then it may take 3 weeks, and by that time, the situation has escalated. I'll talk really, one of the reasons that I'm here is not just for our general work, but particular work that we've been doing in supporting creative initiatives. So when I talk about listening and learning, in 2022, one of the things that we realized talking with our community is that there was very little support that was available for people who wanted to do creative initiatives, whether it was filmmaking, podcasts, other kinds of storytelling, developing anthologies, and also that there needed to be more resources for independent individual activists. A lot of funding was going towards organizations, but there were incredible people like Frieda who create and who are creators and are contributing to the movement. So we established what is called the Asanka Creative Initiatives Fund. And through Asanka, we've been able to fund about 49 projects in the last couple of years. And that really ranges, and it's beautiful. Unfortunately, we have not completely finished. We actually developed a microsite, and which I'd hoped that we would have launched it by now so I could give you all the address. But if you look for it in a couple of weeks, you'll find it. So it's a Asanka microsite that has all of the works that have been produced through Asanka. And so what Asanka has enabled us to do is fund things like documentary storytelling by intersex persons around, the fact that we exist and what are our challenges and how do we navigate. It has enabled organizations to develop anthologies and also develop anthologies in our local languages. One of our partners from Burkina Faso works with trans women, and they brought together women for a workshop, from a creative writing workshop to develop poetry, and they published it and not only in French, which is the national language, but also in More and Jula, two of the local languages. And so that's also really important. These kinds of initiatives that helped us to show that we are here, we've always been here, we continue to exist because our opposition is using that narrative very powerfully against us. And so this work that we're funding, whether it's creating podcasts, whether it is creating anthologies, whether it's enabling people to come together for a queer film festival in Accra, that is all part of the resistance that we're supporting. So I'll end here. I have a lot more to say, but I'll end it here because I think there are other questions.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We have one last questions for the three of you, and then we are going to open for the floor. Yeah. So maybe I'll start with you, Caroline. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It's self-preservation. This is what Audre Lorde has said. Yes. Can you talk to us about how you care for yourself amid this hostility and aggression, and you are someone who's very much involved in resistance on daily basis? And this question is actually to the three of you. Okay. Yeah, so I'll start with Caroline.
Thank you, Hala. For me, when I was thinking about reflecting on that question, the first thing I can think about is community. Caring for myself actually means being in community. It's, when I am able to be with my colleagues who are across the region. It's when we take over restaurants and we're very, very queer in those restaurants and create new spaces. Like those are the kinds of moments where we are together, building community. For me, what also keeps me going and what gives me hope is the incredible work that we've been able to fund. And again, we're working in a context of criminalization. We're working in a context where it's literally illegal to do much of the work that our partners are doing and sometimes do the work that we are doing, but that it is happening. It's happening. And so I think like that, even though the work is a lot, being able to see what we're contributing to, see how people are able to innovate and to do things, I think that helps to keep me going. And again, being in community with other LGBTQI West Africans in our context in West Africa and being unapologetically us, that gives me a lot of hope and that keeps me going.
Amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. I like that. Well, for me, actually, it's to be creative. So I write novels, I write poetry. I'm behind the camera. It's extremely important to archive all of that for new generations, right? So, I want them to know that I was there, I existed, and they can exist as well. I think this is extremely important for me. When my first novel came out in French, now it has been translated into Spanish and English. It was amazing how many young women wrote to me asking me, keep writing, we want you to write, and then to imagine that, there's a university professor who is telling their story. Last week I got a message from a young woman from a university in Algeria who just read my novel. She's like, have you written more? I'm searching. So I think for me, it's really to document that we are here, that we are doing the work for the incoming generation. So, yeah.
Jude, do you want to go ahead? Jude?
But yeah, I would say for me, self-care begins with remembering that I'm more than the struggle that I write about. As a writer, I spend a lot of time entering difficult emotional landscape of my characters, from fear to secrecy, shame, isolation, and it goes on. Because these are the realities that many LGBTQ people in places like Nigeria have experienced. But if you remain inside those spaces all the time, you risk allowing hostility to define the boundaries of your life. And also, like Caroline said, community is very important as well. Just being around people of like minds and networks and fellow writers and activists, and just allowing yourself to be vulnerable with them also helps with my self-care. And yeah, and I also find writing to be very lethargic for me as well. So I write to also um, fight that kind of fatigue I might feel from the world. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's time to extend the conversation beyond the four of us, and we are open for questions or comments.
While everyone is thinking, I have a question. And that is the role of, so Caroline, you mentioned that much of your funding, I don't know how much, comes from European sources or other international sources. And I was wondering, not just for your organization and also for the organization that Hala runs, but also in general for writers and for people, living and going to restaurants and being queer, and how much difference does it make, and to what extent is it important or imperative for formal international organizations like the United Nations, where you were last week, as well as international, sort of solidarity organizations? What kind of difference does it make that those sources of support are there? And then conversely, right now, we see the opposite happening, particularly from the US, but also from other international places where you're having the kind of hostility being exported, and particularly, sort of targeting places like Africa, which had been reliant on a lot of funding for all kinds of programs. So I'm wondering what difference that has made and how you've seen that in your trajectory as activists, which I assume is relatively evident, especially in relation to funding, but also in relation to your work as artists.
I can start.
Does this one work?
Yeah, my work as an artist, it has been extremely difficult to find money to make films. So I use all my research money, and I beg, and this film, I paid for all of it. And I had to work for a couple of summers to like be able to do it. So it's for me, it's work of love. I have to do it. And I'm working on a script for another short film I would like to make based on my novel that's coming out. And I've applied for funding everywhere. It's no. So I listen to, I'm gonna go to you. So I'm also working, summers now to raise my own funding. I have no idea where to go, what to do. So, I have to do it because it's necessary, it's therapeutic, it's important. So, and I also feel that as I'm searching for money does come through work or whatever. So it's important to do the work anyway,
Yeah, I can go. When you were asking your question, I was reflecting on something that happened about 2 years ago, somewhere around this time. We were in our grants committee meeting when the news came out that the Ghanaian Parliament had passed the bill. It's an anti-LGBT bill. And so you can imagine it's a room of activists who work across the region, and you get this news, and it's such a big blow. And I remember when this happened, because it was like a Wednesday, and we got this news in the morning, and we're like, what do we do? And I think one of the things that I loved about it was that the panel said, this is not a moment for despair. This is actually a moment for us to act and to respond. And so what they did at the end of the week is, we looked at all the grants that we had funded, and they were like, did we do enough in Ghana? Can we go back? And there was an organization that had not gotten funding in the first round that does a lot of work around creative spaces, safe spaces for queer women, parties. They do a lot of wellness work. And one of the panel members said, this is an organization that we need to fund. And there was this whole conversation about, in this moment where a bill has been passed, is that where we should put our money? And the panel said, actually, that is the work. That is exactly where we should be putting our money. Because in a time as becoming increasingly difficult, people need a place to be. People need a place to connect. They need a place that's safe. They need places for joy. That is part of the work. So the beauty is we've been able to get funding that enables us to fund those kinds of things. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to have flexible funding that enables us to continue to fund that work. The funding that we have for the creative initiatives comes from one donor. A donor that supports us is a long-term donor, but it comes from one source of funding. And we've been working to try to diversify that. But yeah, I would say it is, even though we've been able to fund, to support creative initiatives and do some of our own, it's not easy in terms of fundraising, and it's becoming increasingly difficult. Earlier, Hala and I were talking about some of the shifts in the philanthropic environment. So a lot of times people focus on the developments with the US government. It is way beyond that. So for example, the Dutch government was one of the biggest funders of human rights, feminist organizing, LGBTQI organizing around the world. That funding is gone. And that impacts both of our organizations. We're seeing the same things happen across the world, whether it's the UK, whether it's Sweden, Netherlands, Canada. We're seeing this shift in a particular way that is moving away from human rights funding and human rights work, and also international work. So that's part of what we're up against. We've been quite fortunate to be able to diversify our funding and to continue to get resources. But it's a challenge, and it's also a challenge when the doors are closing everywhere else and people are looking at one organization to solve all of the problems. So that's part of the reality that we're dealing with. I feel like I kind of answered the question, but answered a few other questions at the same time.
Fantastic. Jude, would you like to respond somehow?
I work in a totally different kind of way from every other person there. I work directly with my city's municipality, where I manage a residency program for displaced writers and artists who have been affected all over the world. So we get our funding directly from the government, and it's secured, and it's a grant that just keeps coming and going. So in that way, I'm not affected by funding. We do have the funding to keep people here in Sweden for a 2-year cycle. So in my program, I manage 2 residencies each year, and they run, concurrently for 2 years. Unfortunately, I know that there's been issues with funding for other cultural programs, like in the US and every other part of the world, but I'm grateful for now that I'm not affected. So that's all I can say.
That's great.
Yeah. More questions?
Thank you. That was really great and inspiring. My question is more about desire. Like, how does desire play a role in your works? And maybe we can even reframe desire to live as resistance.
Jude, have you heard the question?
A question of desire.
I think here, is it desire you said?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Oh, desire.
Desire.
I think desire is like the most revealing way of understanding people's motivations. And so in my writing, I think desire plays a role in the sense of I try never to censor, let me use that word. I try not to censor how my characters carry themselves and react to society. So for me, desire is, that's a very curious question, actually. Um, but can you reframe it for me? Because I'm still trying to wrap my head around, yeah.
So I was thinking about desire to live as resistance. Like we can add joy to that as well
Desire to live.
as resistance. Yeah.
Desire to live, you know, to
Oh,
exist
desire
as
to
a form
live.
of resistance.
Okay, and now it makes a lot of sense. Oh, but yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I think when you're constantly being squashed and your rights are being trampled on, or you're just being told constantly that you're not a person, you're not a human, or your feelings are not valid. One of the biggest way to punch back at that is that desire itself to want to be seen, to want to be yourself. So it is quite important, and I do agree with you that it does play a big role. Yeah.
Would you like to respond to that? Yeah. No, I just want to ask Caroline, because I know she works with a lot of people who are at, huge risk. And unfortunately, I am aware that you have lost people along the way as well. So I'd like you to, if you can respond to that as well.
I'm still thinking about this question, but I'm recalling one conversation that we had. We've been doing some research around anti-rights and anti-gender movements across the region and how they're impacting organizations. And we had a workshop with activists around the report, and I remember one activist say, to be able to resist, you have to be alive. And when you asked that question, I was thinking about that. I don't know if we have conversations specifically talking about it as desire to live or desire to want to be able to continue this work. But certainly, I think in many of our movement spaces, we're increasingly talking about joy. We, within my team, we've been contesting resilience because we're like, why do we always have to be resilient? So we're contesting that a bit, but I'd say in the broader community and movement, people are definitely talking about resistance and what does it look like to resist? What does it look like to thrive? What does it look like to have joy? I would say the conversations now are really that are connected to what your question is, have really been around creating spaces for joy, creating spaces for affirmation, and I think being able to have models and models of what life can look like. How do people navigate? I mean, I think it's amazing to have people like Jude, who's been, doing this writing around, and also himself is a figure that is known within the movement. Being able to see that you're not alone, being able to see other models of possibility, I think that's also really important. And so the more that as a community, and I think especially through this creative work, we're visible, we're showing that there are ways to exist and to navigate our context. There are ways in which we're building families, there are ways in which we're loving in our context. The more that is shared, the more I think it gives hope. But it's very difficult to find hope if you don't see that. If all you're seeing is oppression, violence, like non-recognition of being a human. And so I think that this creative work is really helpful because it's showing different possibilities of us being able to live and to thrive in the places that we are.
Hi, I have one. I have a question, and thank you so much for this panel. I know that social media can be a place for community and belonging for queer people in Africa, especially when they're excluded from real world communities when they come out and so on. And so I guess I was wondering what your experience has been so far with social media as a frontier for harm for LGBTQIA plus people on the continent, and what has been your experience resisting as well in this fair?
Thank you for your question. That's a good one. I'm not on social media, for example. I was born in a country that severely criminalized homosexuality. And when I first wrote my first novel came out in French, there was a priest who sent me a long, long rambling email about Jesus and I don't know what. Anyway, so that was interesting to me. I was like, okay, you read it. But so I'm persona non grata when I go to Cameroon, for example, where I was born. So people don't know my writing. They don't know what I do. Some of them know that I'm a university professor, but I don't know if they, But I just got an invitation by a group of economists from Switzerland. They have a conference in Cameroon. They want me to go talk about LGBTQ and human rights. So I guess once in a while people read about what I do and then I get invitations. So, in Cameroon, I don't make noise at all. Nobody knows who I am. I don't want to die. As one of my cousins was stoned in the street, that has been traumatic. So I think it's better to be alive. The desire to be alive, to continue to do this work is important to me. So,
Jude, do you want to respond to this question?
Yeah, I think I have one or two things to say. Just like Frieda, I'm not on social media as well, and for similar reasons. Nigeria is not a very hospitable place to LGBTQ activists or writers or a person identified as one. But I do know that social media also is a very powerful tool. The most important thing is to know what spaces, that you allow yourself to be involved with. Do not open yourself up to hate and negativity all the time, but rather find spaces that actually are fighting for your rights and things like that. I nothing against social media, but I just feel like it's not the best place sometimes for writers, for me in particular. But yeah, it is important in this day and age to know what's happening around the world. And I know that, like I said earlier, social media does play a big role in that, but just know what spaces you want to find yourself in, or rather I would say curate the spaces where you are in to be on a more safer ground. That's my take on the social media thing.
I think that's an excellent question. On the one hand, I've seen social media help to break isolation, help people to connect. What I was talking about earlier of being able to see other people like you. Social media has supported that. It's also often how people find community when they don't maybe have community around. And so it can be really, really important. With what we see is increasingly there are tensions between people who are primarily on social media around kind of queer and queer LGBTQI like influencers or content creators who are not connected to organizations. So oftentimes in our movement, there is some critique of them because they're very visible and that can sometimes have backlash on other people. And so I think it's really a double-edged sword. On the other side, we have seen social media be a significant tool and a weapon by those who hate us. Social media has been used to organize marches. So in Senegal, 3 years ago, there was 3 marches happening across the country with thousands of people. They mobilized through social media. the people organizing through social media. In my own country, in Côte d'Ivoire, last year, in the last 2 years, and Côte d'Ivoire is seen as a relatively more progressive country within the region. Social media was used on anti-Wubi, which is anti-queer hate campaign. And people use social media to actually organize around the community. They use social media to out people, to docs, to say these are the organizations, these are the activists. And so we are seeing that happen. Previously, we had some success in getting things shut down. And because the other challenge is sometimes it doesn't get stopped in the screening at the social media company level because maybe it's using coded language. So hate messages using coded language or using local language don't get stopped unless they're flagged. So we previously we had connections with Facebook and Twitter when it was Twitter before X, and Instagram, and we were able to engage directly with them around this situation that's happening in this country and being able to flag and get certain accounts shut down. However, that environment has shifted, and especially what we're seeing now is a lot of use of TikTok, and it's very, very difficult to shut down shut down accounts. People, you close the account, they create just another account, and it's very easy for things to go viral. So on the one hand, it's been an amazing tool for our community. On the other hand, it's actually really facilitated people to organize very effectively against us.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just follow up on Mr. Dibia's point about the sort of two ways he thinks about his writing in terms of one audience who's members of the community trying to affirm their own existence through his writing, but then people outside the community who wants to show the humanity. And I was wondering whether, and maybe you don't even think about this as artists, but I teach human rights at the law school, and of course we have all these documents, but it's all about changing people's minds and getting people who are against human rights to be neutral, or get those people who are neutral to be more positive. And it takes tiny little steps to get people in power and communities to change their mind. To what extent do you see your work as doing that, changing people's minds about members of the LGBTQ community in Africa? Or is that just not something you really think is your issue to think about? That's for the politicians or whatever. So is that something that you all are thinking about in terms of changing minds of ordinary people, elites, so that these repressive laws are eliminated or not worsened? Thanks.
Well, thank you for the question. Primarily, it's not something that comes to my mind first and foremost, because I think as a storyteller, you just want to tell stories, basically. And I understand the power of literature itself. And if you remember what I said earlier, I did say people become more empathic when they're able to experience the lives of other people. So I will give you an anecdote. This happened years ago when my novel Walking with Shadows came out. And we're talking 20 years ago, basically. I have my kid brother at the time had this boss who was very homophobic. He used a lot of negative, nasty language at work, where if he sees a guy who is maybe a bit effeminate, he would, degrade them and say silly things, And so he gave this boss a copy of my novel as a Christmas gift. And after the holidays, the boss got back and said when he got the gift, he was a bit surprised to see the surname was the same as my brother's. And my brother was like, oh, that's my brother that wrote that book. And he said he had read the novel, and one thing happened for him. He realized that even though he's not gay, he could understand now some of the issues of that the gay community face in Nigeria. And from that day forward, he just became less aggressive or less abusive towards this colleague of my brother's. So my point being that I do think that we are by nature mostly afraid of what we don't understand. And I think literature has a way of breaking down very complex issues and emotions for people to digest and also create an avenue for them to really experience the lives of other people. And unless you are a psychopath or something, you just have to feel something. So to an extent, the work that we do as writers challenges people's perceptions and sometimes changes people's minds and ideas of how they view certain things that they don't understand. I'm grateful that literature can do that, but it's not something that we as writers set out to do. It's more like just telling stories. We really want to show the world without judgment, just letting you read this stuff and experience this different ideology or different life or different experience. And the onus is now left on you as a human being to understand if you feel any sort of empathy or if your mind can be changed. So it's not something that I would say I do like I go out to do. I'd rather just want to tell stories and be as truthful as possible to the characters, but I'm also aware of how impactful those stories can be to other people who don't understand the lives I'm trying to portray.
I was those of you who are on TikTok might remember in 2022 there was this song that became really popular. It was like the gay anthem of the year. And it was by a Ghanaian trans activist, the first openly Ghanaian trans activist, Angel Maxine, called Wofie. And the song was very catchy, and it's like, your doctor could be LGBTQ, your neighbor could be LGBTQ, your pastor could be LGBTQ, your teacher could be LGBTQ, and it became like the pride anthem in 2022. And I think about this question, how also, whether it's literature, film, music, and this also ties to the social media connection, can create can just encourage people to think differently. And sometimes it creates this spark. I mean, just in a simple, very catchy song about like all the people that are in your life, some of them might be queer, like that, and it's very catchy, and so that message was heard in many different ways. But also, I think one of the most effective things, and it wasn't intentional, I think sometimes what happens is not intentional, is Angel Maxine, this artist, and this was right when the bill was first introduced in Ghana in 2022, she and her mother did a series of interviews. And her mother was a very relatable, middle-class Ghanaian. She would answer questions in Tree and in the local language, not in English. And there's a way in which, Angel Maxine's mother going on national TV and saying, "This is my daughter, she's always been my daughter, I've known her as my daughter," as a relatable person for many people, that had an impact in terms of conversations. And so sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it, as I think, Jude was talking about, sometimes it's, it happens to be the impact, but I think also, especially given that we're so thinking about visuals and audio and, those kinds of things, I think that's important, and that does help to contribute to changing some of the narratives. The other thing that I'll just mention, we have a number of our partners that have increasingly been working on engaging with families. Because in our context, your family is everything. Your family is your source of social security. Your family is your source of economic security, social capital. Your family is everything. And so imagine, as a queer or trans person, you're rejected from your family. That has a whole series of consequences. And so part of what we are seen in terms of what helps to create change is when you have, for example, parents who have been allies and who are willing to come out, or who are willing to even adopt other children whose parents are not, and who can speak to other parents. So some of our partners have been doing work with families. We have partners who are doing work with religious leaders, and particularly looking at traditional religious and cultural leaders. Because when things happen in the countries, oftentimes it's not, yes, laws can have an impact, but a lot of things happen at a community level. When we think about attacks, we think about threats, people getting kicked out of their house, a lot of times it's at the community level. And so how we start to change that is also engaging and changing how people think and engage at a family level, at a community level. Because, yeah, when there's a conflict in a particular community, people don't go to the police first, or they don't go to whatever authorities, they go to whoever is that neighborhood or community leader first. So if that person is somebody who at least understands or is an ally, that can help to have an impact on the situation. So that kind of work is really important. It's as important as the work that we're doing around changing laws and policies, but because the everyday experience, yes, law and policy is a part of it, but the everyday experience for many of us is our communities and the society around us.
Thank you very much. More question? Yes.
Have you been able to go out of community, or go into other communities outside of West Africa? I mean, I know there's probably a lot of resistance in those areas, but.
If we have another question, maybe we can take another question, and then I think that will be our last round of questions. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for your insight, for sharing. So I also love creating art, and so besides like limited funding and like the risk of criminalization, what have been the greatest challenges you guys have faced during frontline work or making art regarding your queer identity, like whether it being like practical challenges or like personal struggles when like laying these ideas on paper, or like societal pressures? Like I really am curious about that. Yeah.
So we have two questions. Would you like to take?
Yeah. So for me, talking about going to other communities, when I finished my first documentary, I was invited to show that documentary in Palestine in a prison, women's prison. It was amazing because it was a way for these women to talk about human rights and domestic violence. That was brilliant. I just thought, oh my God, if only I can go around even, to reach other women around the world, then, I'm doing something impactful. So as the question, taking the risk, I mean, as I said, I do this, when you create, is out of love. If I didn't have enough love in me, I would not do it, right? And, there are always many risks that you take in life, and you have to take them. You have to have that desire that keeps you going. Where sometimes, where it's difficult is we were talking about this during lunch, when a person who has a possibility to be open to others, to new ideas, to, a community of, understanding what Jude has been talking about, empathy, does not give it to you, but, receive you with hostility. That is difficult, right? It's super difficult, but you brush it off and you keep going because you have no way out. You have to keep going, That's what is difficult for me. But, and I also know that, you go from local to international, always, you know. If people have read my novels, like everywhere, I mean, I read Jude's novel. That's why, you know, I thought I was just so impressed because I was like, oh my God, you know, all these people that are coming out to talk about their stories, so powerful work that, you know, I really wanted to be in a conversation with Jude. I didn't, you know, because I just thought it was so powerful, you know, even though I was born next to Nigeria, Cameroon, but I grew up in Switzerland in a cold, which, you know, but so, you know, knowing that Jude is doing this work, it's really encouraging to me, you know, in writing all these stories, you know, so it gives me hope that I can keep writing as well.
Well, do we have another? Yeah. Oh, Jude, you would like to respond very quickly?
Just a quick one, and thank you, Frieda, for your kind words. I will take the second question. That's what kind of personal sacrifices that we've had to make. Locally, when I lived in Nigeria, I witnessed my books being banned from bookstores and from libraries. I lost a lot of friends once they got to know the kind of writing I was doing, and once they got to know my sexuality as well. Lost some family members, not immediate family, but like extended family. But the point is, those are the kind of challenges that you might face, and it's, I think, much more prominent in countries like in Africa than in the West. Nobody cares that I'm gay. I live in Sweden. I mean, there are 1,001 gay people around me all the time. But back home is a different thing. It's a different kind of challenge. And to write stories that are not filled with like hunger and death and all of that is also something that is a bit different. I think the LGBTQ stories should go beyond just the sufferings and the pain, and also to celebrate life and to celebrate love and community. And those are the kind of stories that I also want to champion as well. But like we've all said, it comes with certain sacrifices that we all have to make. I'm glad that I don't live in a hostile environment anymore. But at the same time, I'm very, very conscious of the fact that there are a lot of people who don't have the opportunities that I have. And those are the people I still keep writing for until they are completely recognized. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So for ISTA, we do work in West Africa exclusively. And depending on one's definition, there are between 15 to 16 countries in West Africa. We are currently working in 9. So even though it feels like we do a lot, we recognize there's still a lot that we are not able to do. But another thing that we do is philanthropic advocacy. So when we're in spaces with other funders and people have money, we try to say, hey, are you funding in Central Africa? We don't fund it in Central Africa, but we've actually been supporting a group of activists who want to create a fund in Central Africa. So we've been sharing our experiences and providing technical support. So that's how, one of the ways we realize we can't do it all, but we try to support other people who are doing things. And we also try to use our power and our privilege when we're in spaces with other funders to be like, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? How are you funding in this place? How are you thinking about this gap? So that's how, but we don't envision a future in which we would expand. We have sister organizations that are doing this work, and so we're doing a lot of collaboration, including creating spaces, plans to create convening spaces where LGBTQI activists from across the continent can come together. So that's how we're doing that. One of the things to the question around risk, for those of you who are following a bit some of the new developments around laws or attempts to push laws, one of the things that we see in the generation of laws that have been proposed that are criminalizing is that it's going much more extensive than the laws have gone before. So it's not just the laws that we inherited from our colonizers in many countries were using, it was focused on, quote unquote, on the act, or unnatural offenses. And so it was this language that was really vague, but it was focused on the act. Increasingly, these new laws are focused on identity. They're focused on advocacy. They're focused on funding. The law that's being proposed in Ghana will put to prison any journalist who dares to speak about the issues of LGBTQI, regardless of how they speak about it. It will put journalists in jail. Anybody who creates media, so filmmakers, media houses. So it's this new generation of laws is going way, way beyond. And so it's actually what we have been in conversation with others is how do we attack this from a freedom of expression perspective, because this is beyond, LGBTQI issues when you're creating laws that are literally saying that you cannot talk about this in this country. That's a huge issue. And so we are seeing that happening across, and not just in West Africa, but in Kenya, Uganda, and other parts of the region, the new generation of laws, whether they're LGBTQI specific or around culture, are trying to restrict what can be produced and what can be talked about. Even with art. I mean, Jude talked about his books being banned. There's been a number of beautiful, beautiful films celebrating queer communities, queer love, queer resistance, that the filmmakers cannot show them in their countries. Whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Uganda, there has been some incredible films. And so people go to international film festivals, or they do, openings in London. And so those of us who are in the region, it becomes really difficult. I think that those are some of the, new generation challenges are the ways in which the restrictions are coming up. But of course, visibility is a risk. So we have to find this tension between wanting to be visible, wanting to create, wanting to tell our stories, wanting to put out narratives, and at the same time, security. And at the same time, how do you manage visibility? So I think people have different ways in which they do it, whether it's using pseudonyms, thinking about how they represent people in visual, but it is a challenge because there will always be that tension between visibility and what that looks like in terms of risk.
Jude, Dr. Ekotto, and my dear Caroline, thank you very, very much for these amazing conversations. And thank you for your courage. Thank you for bringing your creativity. And thank you for filling us with the power of love and the desire to resist and the desire to continue living and fight back. Thank you so much. Yeah, and have a wonderful evening.